Vallabha Girivaradari
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari
Yashodhanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodhanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Shamunatira Manachari Shamunatira Manachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodhanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodhanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishwabhat Brahmasya Charya Rastatara Shatashi Shimadavai Charana Vindamuktam Vasura Srila Prabhupada Ki Iskali BT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Sri Guru Brahmara Ki Anant Koti Vaishya Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Sri Rupa Sri Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Sri Shadgoswami Prabhu's Ki Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Shri Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Mathura Ki Shri Maikona Pritam Ki Shri Nilachaj Gunath Pridam Ki Gangamayi Jumnamayi Ki Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki Yugadam Harinam Sankirtan Ki Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Prasadam Distribution Ki Nitai Gaur Premanandi All glories to the Sun devotees All glories to the Sun devotees All glories to the Sun devotees All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. And so there wasn't an Ekadashi then?
Yes, yesterday was Ekadashi. So it would have been, so it's, you know, I mean, it's usually the day after Ekadashi, but we usually fast on Ekadashi. But because it's not Ekadashi, maybe we can do it tomorrow.
Sorry?
Maybe we can do it tomorrow.
Right. Shikundatai Mata Shashiki,
Jan.
Shitosnathurashki, Shikiraraki, Itai word from them. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. The normally serene cloisters of the Roman Catholic Yara Theological Union echoed to the chants of Hare Krishna yesterday. It does not matter what religion you belong to, as long as you love and serve God, said His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We must be delivered from the disease of materialism, or else there will always be want. After the discussion, the president of the Institute's Student Representative Council, the Franciscan seminarian Patrick McClure, 25, said that there seemed to be a consensus in many areas. In particular, we agree with the need to reject materialism, he said. Mr. McClure said the informal meeting reflected an openness and tolerance in the church. Maybe they have something to tell us, he said. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, the activities of Maharaj Priyavrata, text 36. Saevam paramita bala parakrama ikadatu devashi charanana shayanano patita guna visaga samsaganani vritam ivadmanam manyamana atmani veda idam aha. Evam paramita bala parakrama ekadatu devashi charananu shayananu patita guna visaga samsaganani vritam ivadmanam manyamana atmani veda idam aha. Saevam paramita bala parakrama ekadatu Tu devashi charananu shayananu patita guna visaga samsagena nidritam ivadmanam manyamana atmani veda idam aha. Please repeat. Sa Im Maharaj Priyavrata Evam thus Aparimita unparalleled, Bala, strength, Parakrama, whose influence, Ekada, once upon a time, to then, Devarishi, of the great saint Narada, Sharana Anashayana, surrendering unto the lotus feet, Anu, thereafter, Patita, fallen down, Guna Visaga, with material affairs, created by the three modes of material nature. Samsagena, by connection, Anivritam, not satisfied, Iva, like, Atmanam, himself, Manyamana,
Manimana,
thinking like that.
thinking like that.
Atma,
Atma,
self.
self,
Niveda,
Niveda,
possessing renunciation.
possessing renunciation.
Idam,
Idam,
this.
this,
Aha,
Aha,
said.
said,
Translation. While enjoying his material opulences with full strength and influence, Maharaj Priyavrata once began to consider that although he had fully surrendered to the great Saint Narada and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness, he had somehow become again entangled in material activities. Thus his mind now became restless, and he began to speak in a spirit of renunciation. Please repeat. While enjoying his material opulences
while enjoying his material opulences.
with full strength and influence,
with full strength and influence,
Maharaj Priyavrat
Maharaj Priyavrata
once again began to consider
once again began to consider
that although he had fully surrendered
although he had fully surrendered
to the great Saint Narada
to the great
to the great
Saint
Saint
Narada,
Narada,
and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness,
and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness.
he had somehow
he had
Had
somehow
somehow
become again entangled in material activities.
become again entangled in material activities.
Thus his mind now became restless,
As his mind now became restless,
and he began to speak in a spirit of
and
renunciation.
he began to speak in a spirit of renunciation.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17 it is said, Tyaktva swadamam charanam bhajam hare bhajana bhakto tapatettato yadi yatrakva bhava duramabhutam ushikim kuvata avto bhajitam swadamata. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage, yet there is no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. If one somehow or other comes to the shelter of a great Vaishnava, takes to Krishna consciousness because of sentiment or realization, but in course of time falls down because of immature understanding, he is not actually fallen, for his having engaged in Krishna consciousness is a permanent asset. If one falls down, therefore, his progress might be checked for a certain time, but it will again become manifest at an opportune moment. Although Priyavrata Maharaj was serving according to the instructions of Narada Muni meant for going back home, back to Godhead, he returned to material affairs at the request of his father. In due course of time, however, his consciousness for serving Krishna reawakened by the grace of his spiritual master, Narada. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 6.41, Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brashto Vijayate. One who falls down from the process of bhakti yoga is again offered the opulence of the demigods. And after enjoying such material opulence, he is given a chance to take birth in a noble family of a pure Brahman, or in a rich family to be given a chance to revive his Krishna consciousness. This actually happened in the life of Priyavrata. He is a most glorious example of this truth. In due course of time, he no longer wanted to enjoy his material opulences and his wife, kingdom, and sons. Instead, he wanted to renounce them all. Therefore, after having described the material opulences of Maharaj Priyavrata, Shukadev Goswami in this verse describes his tendency for renunciation. The words Devashi Charana Nushayana indicate that Maharaj Priyavrata, having fully surrendered to the great sage Devashi Narada, was strictly following all the devotional processes and regulative principles under his direction. In regard to strictly following the regulative principles, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Dandavat Pranamastan Anupatita. By immediately offering obeisances Dandavat unto the spiritual master, and by strictly following his directions, the student becomes advanced. Maharaj Priyavrata was doing all these things regularly. As long as one is in the material world, he has to be under the influence of the modes of material nature, Guna Visaga. It is not that Maharaj Priyavrata was freed from material influence because he possessed all material opulences. In this material world, both the very poor man and the very rich man are under material influences, for both wealth and poverty are creation of the modes of material nature. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:27, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani savashaha. According to the modes of material nature we acquire, material nature gives us facility for material enjoyment. Umagyanatimirandasyagananjana shalakaya chaksharamritam hena tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Tadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapatakamanam Shri Guru Vaishnavanascha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaganani Niladita Shri Shakram Vitamsha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandha Chakate Gopisha Gopakakanta Radhakanta Namostate Taptakanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Krishavanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Anshikapatarubhyascha Prasannavyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Sari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So if you remember, earlier in this chapter, Maharaj Priyavrata was not inclined to take up household life. But Lord Brahma came and insisted that he do so because he assured Maharaj Priyavrata that this was actually the desire of the Supreme Lord. It says, accept material enjoyment because the Lord extraordinarily has ordered you to do this. You will thus be always liberated from material association and be able to carry out the Lord's orders in your constitutional position. So it's an extraordinary, it's a very rare and extraordinary event that the Lord asks his pure devotee, who is a very renounced devotee, to enter into household life and enjoy great opulence. But it's described that, I think it's Narada Muni who's speaking here. Oh no. So it's Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma says to Maharaj Priyavrata, one who is situated in household life and who systematically conquers his mind and 5 sense organs is like a king in his fortress who conquers his powerful enemies. After one has been trained in household life and his lusty desires have decreased, he can move anywhere without danger. So a renowned sannyasi has so many restrictions on whom he can associate with, where he can live, what he can wear, what his food is, Um, but the grihasta is not restricted in that way, and then in that sense, he's actually in an unconquerable situation, as Lord Brahma says here. After one has been trained in household life and his lusty desires have decreased, he can move anywhere without danger. Of course, then that is could also that statement could also be taken as meaning. Then he can say that then having been trained in household life and his lusty desires have decreased, he can move anywhere without danger. Then that could also mean that he can become a parivrajikacharya in the sense that he can travel anywhere in the world and engage in preaching activities without any danger of becoming entangled. You see in the life of Srila Prabhupada that he was in that category, definitely. And also in the life of Srila Prabhupada, when he was in his household life, we see that he himself was instructed by in dreams by his spiritual master and by Sri Rupa Goswami to give up all attachment to place of residence and position and family attachment, and take sannyas and preach. So it's a combination of following the instructions of the spiritual master and becoming detached through the accepting the grihastha ashram, that one becomes so much free from material desires that he can move anywhere without danger. And it's also a symptom of a pure devotee that because he's constantly desiring to please the spiritual master with body, mind, and words, then there's no opportunity for his body, mind, and words to be engaged in material activities. And Srila Prabhupada utilized this method for engaging many of his young disciples who still had many material attachments. But in one sense, even though not all of them were given sannyas, but he would engage in to the limit of their physical and mental and emotional capacities in the preaching mission. I remember reading in Shyama Sundar's biography that he worked so hard to complete the temple at Berry Place. He worked continuously for weeks and weeks to complete the temple, that after he finished, he slept for 2 days continuously, and he actually missed the whole opening ceremony. He was asleep at that time. And also, this is a very great benediction of a great benefit of being engaged in preaching and following the order of Lord Chaitanya, who says that Yari Deke Tarikaha Krishna Upadesh Amaragi Aigu Oye Desh. Wherever you go, whoever you meet, tell them about Krishna consciousness according to what you've heard from the authorized scriptures. So, especially if we're living in, if we're living in a place where there's lots of people and we're meeting lots of people, the householders generally meet lots of people because they're having to work and supply so many different household paraphernalia They have so many different legal obligations. They have to arrange the education of their children. So they're constantly meeting people. So if they've imbibed this instruction of Lord Chaitanya, and that instruction was also imbibed by the different members of the Parampara who came after Lord Chaitanya, and then if they've been engaged in this preaching spirit, and they follow it faithfully, then they'll always be engaged with body, mind, and spirit in this Sankirtan mission, and in this way they'll be protected. Then they can move anywhere without danger. You see devotees, they always want to have something to share with everyone they meet. Often devotees, when they're traveling, they'll carry a few of Srila Prabhupada's books, or at least they'll want to have some invitation cards so they can invite people they meet to the local program, or they'll have some cards which has got different websites on where people can, everyone they meet, they can connect them in some way to Krishna consciousness. So this is, in this way, even if we're not in the Grihastha ashram in the strict sense, so we may not have children of our own, but we often, especially in the West, then people embrace different social groups as their children, or as their community, or as their responsibility. Some people embrace, orphans. Some people embrace abused children. Some people embrace, refugees. So people take on different causes, and in this way they come in contact with specific groups of professionals, and this creates an opportunity for preaching, and therefore always being protected from falling into selfish activities. This is, so just as Maharaj Priyavrat was in his younger years, he'd already practiced austerities under the instruction of his spiritual masters. So therefore, when he perceived himself becoming overly entangled in material life, then very quickly the spirit of renunciation rose up within him again, and he desired to free himself from all unnecessary entanglements. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter, Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3. Text 34. Indriyasya te ragadvesho vyavastito tayonavasham agacheto yasya pari pantino. There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their object. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion, because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, as long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed, but under rules and regulations, and yet we should not rely upon the control of such allowances. one has to follow those rules and regulations unattached to them, because practice of sense gratification under regulations may also lead one to go astray, as much as there is always the chance of an accident, even on the royal roads. Maharaj Priyavrata, he was following all of the rules and regulations for regulated grihastha life, but nevertheless, he could perceive that there was danger of excessive attachment for regulated sense enjoyment. Here Srila Prabhupada, again in this chapter 3, verse 34, says, any attachment for regulated sense enjoyment must also be avoided by all means. But attachment to Krishna consciousness, or acting always in the loving service of Krishna, detaches one from all kinds of sensory activities. Therefore, no one should try to be detached from Krishna consciousness at any stage of life. So it's important to understand, when we're engaged in preaching activities and we may perceive some material attachment rising up, it's important to understand that difficulty or that problem is not due to our service, but it's due to allowing ourselves to become attracted again to the material energy. So although Srila Prabhupada engaged his disciples in many very adventurous projects, going to open temples in different cities around the world, starting magazines, going out to collect funds to build temples, all of this was devotional service, Krishna consciousness. But in the course of those activities, there was, of course, temptation was there. Because the persons they were engaging with would often invite them to come to their homes, or invite them to go to restaurants, and so one always has to be on one's guard, and actually, one has to remember the responsibility that we've been given. We've been given the responsibility by Lord Chaitanya, Yaradeke Tarakaha Krishna Upadesh Amarabhya Guru Hriyadesh. Whoever you meet, wherever you go, give them some knowledge of Krishna, Krishna Upadesh, according to the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because this may be their only chance to be contacted by Krishna consciousness. So just like a doctor takes an oath to always act for the benefit of his patient, so we also should remember that in every circumstance we have a responsibility to act for the eternal well-being of those who we come in contact with. And that means that we have to protect ourselves from the contamination of the association of very materialistic people. So Maharaj Priyavrata could perceive that he was becoming contaminated. There's also in the same chapter, in chapter 3, it's one of the last verses in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Tasmat Ramindriyanya Niyamya Bharatar Shubha Padmanam Prachihiyenam Jnana Text 41. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Yeah, so again, Maharaj Priyabrata, he was perceiving this, that although he was following the rules and regulations for performing devotional service in the Grihastha ashram, he could perceive that there was some contamination of lust coming. Srila Prabhupada says in this purport to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 41, so from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses. One can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service for the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments?
Since how simultaneous the detachment from material senses from the sense objects is to be coupled by attachment to Krishna. So there's an emphasis on detachment here. So what's the opposite?
Well, attachment comes primarily through constant hearing and chanting of the name, form, qualities and pastimes of the Lord, in the association with devotees who have that attachment. So, engaging in preaching activities in Sankirtan under the order of the pure devotee, if one is remembering the instructions and the desire of the spiritual master that we engage in Sankirtan, in preaching, one is really aware that this is the desire of my spiritual master, then that will engender attachment. But if the activity just becomes mechanical, then we're putting ourselves in a situation where we will be, because of the vacuum created by the lack of meditation on the spiritual energy behind the activity. So a devotee who is always remembering that I'm doing this to please my spiritual master because my spiritual master really, has my interested heart, and I've surrendered my heart to my spiritual master. A devotee who is in that consciousness, whatever activity he's performing, he's hearing and chanting constantly. Whatever, he's always remembering his spiritual master. So that devotee will naturally develop attachment to Krishna. But someone who's not able to remember the lotus feet of the spiritual master at all times, then due to that vacuum caused by that lack of remembrance, then the vacuum will be filled by pride in one's material abilities, or filled by sensory pleasure of interacting with materialistic persons, or many different kinds of subtle sense gratification. So when we realize that we've fallen into that condition, either by our own introspection or by the intervention of our God brothers and God sisters, then we need to hear and chant the pastimes of the Lord, the pastimes of the Lord's devotees. We need to increase our hearing and chanting at that time. And then that may be sufficient for us to revive our remembrance of the mood in which we perform our activities. Or it may not be. It may be that we have to continue to change the balance of our activities in some way to put more weight on hearing and chanting. So then we need to approach the spiritual master or approach our spiritual authorities and express that we've fallen into a precarious situation. Is that okay? Antra Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Jai Gaura Premanandi,
His Grace Vasi ki.
Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki, Jai.